Chapter 18. Wars and Peace Efforts. History of Israel, Six-Day War. 1967. Yom Kippur. War 1973. Peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan. The desert was still when dawn broke on June 5, 1967. The air above the Sinai shimmered with heat. A deceptive calm before the thunder. At precisely 7:45 a.m., a low rumble rose from the west. It grew, multiplied, until the sky seemed to tremble. Over 200 Israeli fighter jets, flying so low they nearly skimmed the desert sand, poured across the frontier toward Egypt. The operation had a name whispered only in high command focus. In less than an hour, the balance of the Middle East would tilt on its axis. Inside Israel, families sat glued to transistor radios, the lifeline of a nation perpetually at war with its neighbors. Mothers whispered prayers, children were hushed. In Tel Aviv, Prime Minister Levi Eshkol paced his office chain-smoking, knowing that if the gamble failed, the fledgling Jewish state might not survive its third decade. Across the Arab world, leaders had spoken of pushing Israel into the sea. Now the moment of truth had come. What unfolded over the following 6 days would become legendary and improbable. Lightning-quick victory that redrew the map of the Middle East, but the triumph of 1967 carried within it the seeds of future agony. 6 years later, in 1973, on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Israel would be caught off guard, bleeding, shaken to its core in the Yom Kippur War. And yet, out of these wars, out of loss and stubborn resilience, would emerge the first true peace between Israel and an Arab neighbor, Egypt and later, Jordan. This chapter is the story of that perilous dance between fire and reconciliation, between sword and olive branch. The Six-Day War, 1967. A nation on the edge, the road to war in 1967 was not a single path, but a tangle of threats, bluffs, and miscalculations. In May of that year, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, the charismatic voice of Arab nationalism, ordered United Nations peacekeepers out of the Sinai Peninsula. Within days, he massed Egyptian troops along Israel's border and blockaded the Straits of Tiran. Cutting off Israeli shipping a move, Israel had long declared a casus belli. In Israel, the mood was electric with fear. Newspapers printed maps showing Arab armies encircling the small nation, their leaders vowing its destruction. In whispers spread of a second Holocaust, this time in the desert, men and women rushed to volunteer, not only for the army but for funeral societies preparing for mass casualties. And yet beneath the anxiety was also a defiance. "We will not die again," one Israeli reservist told a journalist as he boarded his bus for the front. The government hesitated. Prime Minister Eshkol, a cautious man, dithered on live radio, fumbling his words. The public's confidence wavered. Only when General Moshe Dayan, with his iconic black eye patch and aura of warrior poet, was appointed defense minister, did morale stiffen. Behind the scenes, Chief of Staff Yitzhak Rabin wrestled with insomnia and chain-smoked to steady his nerves. On June 5th, Israel struck first. Its pilots flew a daring mission. At dawn, they swooped down on Egyptian airfields, catching the planes still lined up wing to wing. In hours, the Egyptian Air Force was reduced to twisted metal. Jordan and Syria, misled by Egyptian claims of victory, joined the fray, only to suffer similar fates. Israel's tiny air force now dominated the skies. On the ground, Israeli armored divisions slashed through the Sinai with breathtaking speed. In Jerusalem, paratroopers fought a ferocious battle for the Old City. On June 7th, as the shofar sounded by the Western Wall for the first time in nearly 2 millennia, soldiers wept openly, their rifles slung across their shoulders. "The Temple Mount is in our hands," Colonel Madagur declared. For many Jews around the world, it was a biblical moment, history collapsing into the present. By the war's end, Israel had captured the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. In just 6 days, the nation had tripled its territory. The Arab world was humiliated, its armies shattered. Yet for Israel, victory was bittersweet. The lands won contained more than geography, they contained millions of Palestinians, whose national aspirations would now collide head-on with the Jewish state. The aftermath, triumph and dilemma, The euphoria of 1967 was intoxicating. In Tel Aviv, crowds danced in the streets, waving flags, singing folk songs that promised eternal return. Synagogues overflowed with worshippers giving thanks. The Jewish diaspora felt a surge of pride, a vindication of survival. But the exhilaration masked a deeper, more dangerous question. What to do with the land and the people now, under Israeli control? The Arab states, at a summit in Khartoum, issued the infamous three no's. No peace, no recognition, no negotiations. Yet behind closed doors, a handful of Israeli leaders wondered if the captured territories might be bargaining chips for peace. Could land be exchanged for recognition? For a brief moment, hope flickered, but the tide of history was already shifting. Settlements began to appear in the West Bank, driven by both strategic planners and religious nationalists who saw biblical prophecy fulfilled. The occupation hardened into a daily reality, with checkpoints, military rule, and growing Palestinian resentment. Yom Kippur War 1973. A bitter surprise 6 years later, the price of victory would be exacted. On October 6, 1973, as Jews fasted and prayed on Yom Kippur, sirens shattered the stillness. Egyptian and Syrian forces launched a coordinated surprise attack, storming across the Suez Canal and the Golan Heights. The timing was cruelly brilliant. Israel's army was thinly spread, its guard lowered on the holiest day. At first, panic gripped the country. Radio broadcasts broke into prayers with urgent calls for reservists to report. Families abandoned synagogue pews for bomb shelters. On the front lines, Israeli soldiers were overwhelmed, retreating under heavy fire. In the Sinai, Egyptian infantry, armed with Soviet-made Sagar missiles, decimated Israeli tanks. On the Golan, Syrian armor poured down the plateau toward Galilee, threatening to breach into Israel proper. For days, Israel seemed on the brink. Defense Minister Dayan, once the hero of 1967, sank into despair, muttering of the destruction of the Third Temple, a metaphor for national catastrophe. Prime Minister Golda Meir under unimaginable pressure. Chain-smoked and wrestled with pleas from her generals to consider nuclear readiness as a last resort. And yet, as in 1967, resilience turned the tide. Within a week, Israel mobilized 400,000 reservists. Fierce battles raged. In the Sinai, General Ariel Sharon, brash and unorthodox, led a daring maneuver to cross the Suez Canal, circling the Egyptian Third Army. In the north, Israeli forces pushed the Syrians back beyond the Golan Heights, within artillery range of Damascus. By the time a U.S.-brokered ceasefire took hold on October 25th, Israel had regained lost ground, but victory was Pyrrhic. Over 2,600 Israeli soldiers were dead, a staggering toll for a small nation. The myth of Israeli invincibility, born in 1967, lay in ruins. The war left scars not just on the battlefield, but on the psyche of a people who had believed themselves untouchable. The road to peace. Egypt and Israel, ironically, it was out of the ashes of the Yom Kippur War that peace began to grow. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, though defeated, had restored Arab honor. The sight of Egyptian troops crossing the Suez, even briefly, gave him political capital. Unlike Nasser before him, Sadat sought not endless confrontation but a way forward. In 1977, the world gasped as Sadat flew to Jerusalem, becoming the first Arab leader to set foot in Israel. Standing before the Knesset, he declared, "I come to you today on solid ground, so that we may build a durable peace." His courage stunned Israelis. Many wept, others doubted. Could the man whose armies had killed so many now be trusted as a partner? Prime Minister Menachem Begin, leader of the right-wing Likud party, was no dove, but he recognized opportunity. Under U.S. President Jimmy Carter's mediation at Camp David in 1978, Begin and Sadat forged a deal. Israel would withdraw from the Sinai in exchange for peace with Egypt. It was a bold gamble. For the first time, Israel would trade land for recognition. The treaty, signed in 1979, was a watershed. Egypt became the first Arab state to recognize Israel. Borders were drawn, ambassadors exchanged, and the guns along the Suez fell silent. Israelis celebrated, though uneasily. Some felt betrayed, giving up Sinai settlements and oil fields. Among Arabs, Sadat was vilified as a traitor. 2 years later, in 1981, he paid with his life assassinated by extremists. Yet his legacy endures as the man who cracked open the door to peace. Peace with Jordan 1994. A quieter victory. The road to peace with Jordan was less dramatic, but equally profound. For decades, Israel and Jordan had waged shadow, war spying, skirmishing, occasional back-channel contacts. King Hussein of Jordan, elegant and cautious, had privately signaled his pragmatism, but the political winds of the Arab world restrained him. By the early 1990s, however, with the Cold War ending and the Middle East reshaped by the Gulf War, new possibilities emerged. In 1994, under U.S. sponsorship, Israel and Jordan signed a formal peace treaty. Unlike with Egypt, there was little land to exchange, just border demarcations, water-sharing agreements, and promises of cooperation. The signing ceremony on the desert border was a quieter affair than Camp David, but no less historic. Israelis could now cross into Amman without fear. Jordanians could travel to Tel Aviv. Commerce, tourism, and intelligence cooperation followed. For Israel, peace with Jordan meant security on two of its longest frontiers. For King Hussein, it meant stability and American aid. Wars that reshaped the Middle East, the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, were more than military conflicts. They were tectonic shifts in Middle Eastern history. The former gave Israel strategic depth in Jerusalem, but saddled it with the Palestinian question. The latter humbled Israel, eroded its aura of invulnerability, and forced its leaders to consider diplomacy as survival, not luxury. Peace with Egypt and Jordan was groundbreaking, not only because it ended state-to-state wars, but because it signaled that even sworn enemies could recognize each other's legitimacy. These treaties, fragile and often cold, have nonetheless held for decades. They proved that, while ideology and hatred ran deep, pragmatism could prevail. And yet the story is unfinished. The Palestinians left outside both deals continued to live under occupation. The hope that peace with Egypt and Jordan might open a broader path to resolution never fully materialized. Instead, Israel found itself secure against its neighbors, but entangled in conflict within. From the lightning strike of the Six-Day War to the shattering ambush of Yom Kippur from the handshake at Camp David to the quiet signing on the Jordanian border, Israel's history in these decades was a pendulum swing between war and peace. The guns fell silent along some frontiers, but the echoes remained, reverberating through refugee camps, through settlements, through the stubborn soil of a land both promised and contested. The question that lingered was as old as the Bible itself. Could swords truly be beaten into plowshares in this land of prophets and battlefields? Or was each fragile peace merely an interlude before the next storm?